All right. Hi, everybody. Uh, Thank you for tuning in today. We are going to be going over program evaluation, which is going to be a very important part of your NC Literacy Core program year. I myself will be presenting alongside Corliss Brown Thompson, who is our program evaluator for NCLC and has been working with us for quite some time, and is also a previous AmeriCorps member, so we're really excited to have her here. All right, so a little bit about me. I am the program director for NC Literacy Core. My name is Narina Faruqi. I'm also a staff member at SCALE, which is the Student Coalition for Action in Literacy Education, which is also under the umbrella of the School of Education at UNC Chapel Hill. And SCALE oversees a few different literacy programs. So we oversee the America Reads program, and we oversee the NC Literacy Core program. I'm also a UNC Chapel Hill alum, and like Corliss, I'm a former AmeriCorps member. I did Project Power back in 2010 in Asheville, North Carolina. And then I'll hand it over to Corliss, and she can introduce herself.
Great. Thank you, Narina. Hi, I'm Corliss Brown Thompson. Corliss is what I go by, or you can call me Dr. Thompson as well. I am a faculty member at Northeastern University. I teach in the Graduate School of Education. I teach research design courses as well as courses in social justice education. I am a program evaluator by training. Like Narina, I am also a UNC Chapel Hill alum. I got my PhD at UNC, and I learned program evaluation there under Dr. Rita O'Sullivan. And currently, in addition to the teaching that I do at Northeastern, I also evaluate several different programs. I'm evaluating a STEM teacher education program, a bridge program for At Promise College freshman students, and then I also am the evaluator for this particular project, North Carolina Literacy Core. One of the reasons why North Carolina Literacy Core is so important to me is because I was a former AmeriCorps member, actually at SCALE, a NC Literacy Core member, and I worked with the America Reads program. And so one of the things that I noticed as I was working with the program was we had to do all of this paperwork and all of this data collection, and I never always understood why. And so one of the really important things to me as an evaluator is to make sure that you understand the purpose of evaluation, what data we're collecting, why we're collecting it, and what is done with that particular data. And we will talk about that today.
Great. Thank you so much, Corliss. All right.
So the objectives for this session, we're going to define evaluation. We're going to talk about the goals, activities, and outcomes of NC Literacy Core. We're going to work to make sure that you understand the required data collection activities and then how to report that data back to the program. All right, so first, what is program evaluation? Essentially, program evaluation seeks to answer questions about programs. And it's questions that are of interest to program staff, participants, funders, and the public as well. So a big part of starting any program evaluation is really determining what questions are important to us. And who is interested in program evaluation? Well, it can be useful for program staff. The program wants to know how the program is going. How are we doing? Are we meeting our goals? The participants in the program, is this program that I'm spending my time on, is it going to be effective? Will it help me? Also the funders of the program, somebody is paying so that this program can actually go forward. People's salaries are being paid, equipment is being paid for, time is being paid for. Funders want to know, is their money being well spent? As well as the public. Any type of federally funded program comes from taxpayer dollars. So taxpayers also want to know, where are my tax dollars going? And is it being used in a way that helps people, that helps better people's experiences? In this instance, people's ability to read and be literate. Next slide. All right, so one big part of program evaluation is program monitoring. So essentially, how are we documenting what exactly the program is doing. Is the program doing what it's being funded to do? And so program monitoring is related to the day-to-day functions of program personnel. So in this literacy program, you're going to be tutoring people that need literacy support, and you're going to be training other people to help folks in literacy. So you want to be tracking how that is going, and we'll talk more specifically about how to do that. And it's important that you know that this tracking and monitoring is one of your core responsibilities as a literacy core member. And so when we think about program monitoring, we're thinking about who, what, when, where, how often within the program. So already right now, you probably know that you're going to be working to tutor people. So who's being tutored, that will need to be tracked. What programs are they in? How often are they actually participating in tutoring? All of those things we will want to collect. And again, we'll talk more about how to do that. Next slide. And then there's also outcomes and performance measures. So when we were looking at outputs, that's just tracking, did people show up to tutoring? How long did they stay? Who's coming? But if we do tutoring well, it has, there's an intended outcome. If we're doing the tutoring and our learners and students are actually getting what they need, then they should be showing an increase in reading ability. And so we will want to take a look at, that increase. Are they actually improving their reading ability from the beginning of the program to the end of the program? And you'll hear about performance measures, and those include targets related to these particular outcomes. For example, maybe you have a goal within your program of having 100 students improve their literacy over the course of the year. Maybe your goal looks a little bit different. And that's something that's determined for the program at large. So Narina will have a number in mind in terms of a performance measure target that she wants to hit for the end of the year. But it takes each site meeting their own targets in order to really reach that end of year target for the entire program. And understanding these targets and outcomes helps us understand, is the program working? So essentially, it's great that we're, tutoring folks and people are coming, but if they're not improving their literacy, then, are we doing what we said that we were going to do? And more importantly, how can we begin to think about making shifts so that we can meet those targets? Next slide. All right, so you have a sense of looking at outcomes, looking at outputs. You know that you're going to be collecting data. So what is your role as a literacy core member in this? So essentially, North Carolina Literacy Corps is responsible for monitoring and evaluating its work. I am the overarching evaluator, but I can't do the evaluation work unless people are submitting their data. And the reason why it's important for members to submit the data is because you're there every day, you're closer to the data, you have a better sense of what it means and how to track it. Every program is different. And so every program is going to have a slightly different approach to collecting the same data and reporting those activities. So the important takeaway here is to know that data collection and evaluation is your responsibility, even though it's a collective effort. Next slide. All right, so what are these steps to the program evaluation? So the first step is evaluation planning. Evaluation planning is a big circle because that's one of the big things that we will focus on today, and something that's very important for your role. Another big piece is the data collection. That's another core part of your responsibility, and we'll talk about that, what that looks like. Evaluation planning is really important because if we don't have a sense of what we're collecting and why we're collecting it, then it becomes more difficult to ensure that the data that we're collecting is actually what needs to be collected. And of course, we want to make sure that we understand the data that's being collected and why it's being collected. So we'll talk more about that planning for Literacy Corps next. Next slide. All right, so evaluation planning. So there's essentially two goals for all Literacy Corps members. The first is to improve organizational capacity with effective volunteer management strategies. So we know that the overall purpose of Literacy Corps is to help more learners become literate. And NC Literacy Corps has a specific strategy on how to do that. A piece of that strategy is to help train people that are volunteers, help other nonprofit literacy organizations improve their capacity through their volunteers so that they can tutor more people and tutor more people effectively. So you as a Literacy Corps member on site will have a role in helping those volunteers and helping the site improve their volunteer capacity. Then the second goal is to have direct and indirect service with participants. So for some of you, you will be tutoring students every day. For others of you, you will be maybe tutoring students on some days, but a lot of the work is supervising the volunteers that actually do the tutoring with the participants. So when we say indirect service, that means that you're measuring the work that volunteers are doing with the students and the learners, and then you're also looking at your own direct service to the learners. All right, so the next question is, what are we going to monitor and what data will we collect underneath each of these particular goals? Next slide. All right, so the first goal we're going to look at is improving organizational capacity with effective volunteer management strategies. And again, before we can even plan the evaluation, which we have as the first step, you really need to understand your program. Every program is going to look a little bit different, but essentially each AmeriCorps member is going to implement volunteer management strategies at your particular site. Narina, did you have anything that you wanted to add here?
Yes, so we will be going over this in the next few slides as well, but I did want to say that along with what Corliss was saying, that every site will look different, and there'll be a few tools in place to help you figure out what volunteer management strategies you will implement. One of them being a survey that you will take at the beginning of your program year with your site supervisor to see what's missing and what's needed volunteer management wise. Some sites may have a need may struggle with recruitment, so that could be one of the things that you end up working on during the year. Other sites might have more of a need for creating events for volunteer appreciation. So it will definitely vary by site, and it will make a lot more sense once you look over the survey, but your site supervisor will be involved in the beginning of this process with you, and you will continue to check in with your site supervisor throughout the year to see where you're at with this.
All right, next slide. All right, so again, each site is going to be different, but your basic responsibilities are going to include volunteer management practices. You're going to determine what that looks like, what type of support volunteers need, and you're also going to be responsible for recruiting, training, and managing the volunteers that are there on site already. Next slide. All right, so the first piece of coming to understand what this volunteer management process will look like is the survey that Narina mentioned. And the purpose of the survey is for you to determine, along with your site supervisor, exactly what are your target areas for volunteer management in this particular year. So Narina, do you mind pulling up the survey? All right, so here we have the NC Literacy Corps member website, and on this website you'll find all of the program evaluation tools that you will need. And so Narina's scrolling down to the required evaluation tools, and you'll see where it says volunteer assessment documents. This is where you'll find that initial survey that you'll want to take with your site supervisor. Notice that it says under bullet 3 that it needs to be completed by the end of September. Narina, did you want to show it or do you want to keep going? Oh, here it comes. Perfect. All right, so essentially here is the volunteer management, the site volunteer management assessment. You'll notice that it's got a list, like A through P there, of different types of volunteer management strategies, things like recruitment strategies, a screening process, volunteer recognition, a method of tracking volunteer information. But if you haven't been to your site yet and you haven't talked with the site supervisor, you probably don't know exactly which one makes the most sense, which is why you want to take this survey with your site supervisor to determine, what makes the most sense, kind of what's the status of all of these different spaces. So if you say that the direct supervision of volunteers, letter I, isn't implemented at all, then maybe that's something that you'd want to target. And so essentially you'll go through and you'll rank all of these depending on what level of implementation you actually have.
And as Corliss said, this is something that can be easily accessed through the NCLC website, nclc.web.unc.edu. You will, once you get to that site, you will go to resources, and for current members, it will ask you for a password. The password is literacy. And once you log in, you'll be able to access all the important documents that you need for program evaluation. We'll be going over some of these other documents as we go through the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Narina.
I'm going to pull this up now. So in addition to the survey that you take at the beginning of the year with your site supervisor, this survey that we just showed you, that's really a tool for you to assess with your site supervisor what's needed. After you complete that initial assessment, you're going to use that initial assessment to fill out your volunteer retention and recruitment plan. Everyone has been shared a Google Drive version of this based on their site, but you can also print out the paper version and fill that out. It's however you want to do it. Some people really like keeping it in the Google Drive because they can just add throughout the year, and there's an online record of it as well. This recruitment and retention plan goes through the different steps that you would need as you go through the year. So this document is meant to be ongoing. You will be revisiting this throughout the year to see where you are as far as your steps go, if things are lining up the way you want them to, if there's anything that you need to change or assess. So you will be revisiting this throughout the year. Corliss, is there anything else you wanted to add about this?
Yeah, can you just show the Word doc, or
yeah,
that way people can get a sense of what it looks like.
I thought it was up, but let me try that again.
We can see the website.
Okay. What about now?
Yes.
Great. So this is the volunteer retention and recruitment plan. And as I was saying before, it's highlighted all the steps. So you've got your initial assessment, then you're going to develop your plan. Step 3 is executing your plan. Step 4 is assessing the effectiveness of your volunteer recruitment and retention plan. And one thing I wanted to add is it says at least 3 of the strategies listed below, but I want to give you room to also, if there's something beyond this that you need to add, that's fine, because as we said before, each site is different. So maybe you're fine with these strategies, but there's some other things that are needed volunteer recruitment wise as far as your site goes. So you'll identify your areas of improvement, and then you'll come up with your strategies for step 2. And then you'll execute your plan. So you'll be documenting how you're carrying out your strategies for improvement. And then finally, step 4 will be you assessing the effectiveness of your plan and suggestions for continued improvement. And one of the purposes of these is if you do have a pretty solid plan in place, it could be something that the AmeriCorps member next year could continue and work off of to keep strengthening that aspect of your organization.
That sounds great. I don't have anything to add, so we can keep going.
Great.
The last bullet on this slide is that you will use a notebook to document your efforts, and we'll talk more about the notebook towards the end of the presentation.
Okay, great.
All right, so we've talked about the volunteer management assessment. We've talked about the recruitment plan. If you remember back to the beginning of the presentation when we talked about program monitoring and knowing kind of the who, what, when, where, how often, this is where you will track this related to your volunteers. So we want to know who are the volunteers. You need to put in their names, or for privacy reasons, if it's better, you can give them their own unique ID number or method of identification, but we need to know who each individual is. We also need to know the number of hours. So if you need to know the number of hours, you're going to have to develop some type of tracking system so that folks are signing in, signing out, so that you have a sense of how long people are volunteering when they do come in. You also are going to be taking a look at the volunteer training sessions. A big part of your work is making sure the volunteers know what they need so that they can be effective tutors. So you'll want to track those volunteer training sessions. You'll want to track, what's the name of those volunteer training sessions? Or are you doing like a cultural competency training or a literacy training or orientation? And then who's coming to those training sessions? You'll want to track all of those things. And then you'll, as we say, you want to track the number, the type of volunteer training sessions. And you're going to capture this information in the Google Drive. So Narina, do you mind pulling up the Google Drive so we can take a look? And we'll look at the volunteer data submission sheet. All right, so you see how it says volunteer name or code. We need to know when they were registered. If they were registered and they've been ongoing, you can put that, they were an ongoing volunteer from the previous year or something like that. We want to know if they were recruited by you, if they're managed by you. If you're managing them and you're putting them into the spreadsheet, then they are somebody that is part of the group of volunteers that you're responsible for. And then there's a volunteer evaluation. We will talk about that shortly. Then comes a big section starting at column F, contact hours. So that's where you will put the compilation of hours for the month. So for August, we don't have any method here to track every day, right? We just want to know the total number for August. So let's say you have a volunteer that volunteered for 2 hours the first week of August and 5 hours the last week of August. That would be a total of 7 hours, so you'd put in 7. So notice that I've kind of done some basic adding in my head. But essentially what you will want to have is you will want some type of tracking mechanism so that you're understanding on a daily basis or a weekly basis how long volunteers are volunteering for. And you'll want to put it in for each individual volunteer. And so again, there's no like weekly counting system here. So you'll want to make sure you have that counting system somewhere else. And then as the months go along, you'll want to put in the total number of hours for each month. So September, maybe you have 3 hours, October, 0, et cetera, et cetera. And then it'll add up over on the other side, and you'll see it automatically tabulates for you the total number of volunteer hours. And then at the bottom, it will add for each volunteer how many hours you have total. All right. Okay, let's take a look at the volunteer trainings tab. All right, so here is where you'll track the trainings that you do. So let's say that the first training you do is an orientation. You can just put in orientation. The date of the training, tell us when that actually happened. How many attendees? Notice it doesn't ask you to say which attendees. It wants you to have a number. So when you do a training, you'll want to make sure that you're taking attendance so that you can tabulate the number. And then who did the training? Was it you? Was it you and a site supervisor? Maybe it was you and another member. Maybe it was you and another volunteer. Here we want to know, who was doing this particular training. So you can just list those names there. And, it's fine to do multiple, like maybe you do a couple different orientations. We will know that it's a different orientation based on the date. If you're doing multiple orientations on the same day, you may want to say orientation session A, orientation session B, just so that you can differentiate between those different types of sessions. So this is where you'll do your monitoring for your volunteer data. All right, so I think we can go back to the PowerPoint unless you have anything you wanted to add, Narina.
I did want to say real quick, because I realized we didn't give much context for this. So as we continue to go through the PowerPoint, every member has a Google spreadsheet that they have access to for their specific site. So this is where you're tracking your learner hours, which we'll go into next, and where your volunteer and volunteer trainings information lives. So just keep in mind, this is where you will be recording your data, but you also want to make sure, as with the volunteer trainings and the volunteer data submission, that you have some kind of hard copy evidence of where you're getting your information from. So for volunteer data, as far as contact hours go, having whether your site has an online or electronic system for keeping track of contact hours, or sign-in sheets, or whatever that looks like, you want to make sure that you have a source of where you are getting your data from.
Great. All right, next slide. All right, and the last piece of the volunteer data collection is a volunteer satisfaction survey. That's given once per year at the end of the year to understand what their volunteer experience was. There's an electronic version on the member website with all of the other tools, or you could give it via paper. And you can do that easily by printing out the survey that you find online. And also some sites already have their own volunteer satisfaction survey, so it's fine to use the ones that are already created by your site as well. Next slide. I forgot the last piece. So we have the end of year retrospective volunteer management post test. So if you recall the test that the survey that you took with your site supervisor, that you will take with your site supervisor, deciding which particular volunteer strategies you wanted to focus in on for this particular year. At the end of the year, the site managers will be given a similar looking survey, but it basically is asking them to rate the extent to which there have been improvements made in specific volunteer management areas. So if you target, tracking volunteer information, and at the beginning of the year it was not implemented, essentially what we're hoping for at the end of the year, at the beginning of the year if it wasn't implemented, at the end of the year we're hoping to see some improvement there. And so you'll take that, the site supervisor will take it. Sometimes you have to sit down with your site supervisor to get them to take it and, to remind them of the pieces that you were actually working on for the year. That just depends on kind of your site manager and their relationship to the project. But that will be a piece that you need to get done at the end of the year. That is also on the website. We're not going to go through it right now, but just know that you can find it here on this website when you're ready for it.
Thank you, Corliss. Yeah, just to remind you, this is all on the NCLC website. So when you go down, scroll down to volunteer assessment documents. This is where you can find your volunteer satisfaction survey, a print version and an online version, and then your post-volunteer management survey that we just spoke about, also underneath volunteer assessment documents.
Great. Thank you, Narina.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next slide. All right, so next steps. You want to take the member volunteer management survey. You'll do that with your site supervisor. You can do this in a meeting with them where you're determining those volunteer management goals. Based on that conversation, based on that survey, you want to write your volunteer management plan. We took a look at that. That was the Word document. You also have it in your Google Drive. You want to make sure that you fill that out. It shows you step by step what you need to do. And then after that, you want to create, after you have a sense of, what does that plan look like, you want to start creating, a plan and just kind of working on the actual process that you'll go through to actually collect this data. So you want to create a plan to document your volunteer trainings. Maybe you have a calendar of volunteer trainings that you'll create. And then there's a need to really think about, okay, if we have, one training per month, how are we going to actually document these volunteer trainings? Well, we're going to keep our agendas. We're going to make sure that we take attendance. Go ahead and plan now what that needs to look like. Build it into your training plan. That way, as it goes along each month, you can just be updating these things. Same thing in terms of your volunteer data. You want to make sure that you have a sense of how you'll collect attendance, how you'll know or be able to track volunteers once they come into the program. Go ahead and create a plan to do all of those particular pieces. Again, that way, once it's time to submit your data and put it on the Google Drive, you'll have everything already ready. And then, you want to also create a timeline or a calendar for your volunteer data collection events. So you just want to do some kind of longer term planning to make sure that you don't miss anything. For example, at the very end of the year, you know that you'll need to sit down with your site supervisor to work through that final volunteer management assessment, the retrospective assessment. And so you want to make sure that that's kind of on your April or May or whenever your program ends to-do list. That way you don't forget, because by that time at the end of the year, everybody's going to be ready to be finished. And so you want to make sure that you have a timeline, a calendar planned out so that you're not missing anything. And those are some of those next steps that you can take now or as soon as you're meeting with your site supervisor at the beginning of the year to make sure that you'll be ready to enter the data and do the reporting that you'll need to do throughout the year. Narina, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I feel like you covered all of it.
Great. Next slide. All right, so now we're going to transition into that second goal related to indirect and direct service for K through 12 and adult learners. Again, it's going to follow a very similar pattern to the volunteer data. Before you can plan the evaluation, you have to have a sense of what your programming is going to look like. And so essentially everyone's doing direct or indirect service with participants, meaning you're tutoring them. And that tutoring is going to depend on what kind of program it is. And so you want to have a sense of, what are your core primary responsibilities? Are you spending, a lot of your days sitting down with learners and tutoring, or are you spending more of your time with the volunteers and making sure that they're doing what they need to be doing with the students? Either way, you just need to have a sense of what that programming looks like. Did you want to add anything, Narina?
Not too much, basically just piggybacking off of what you said. It will definitely vary as far as direct and indirect service goes, but even if you're in a position of supervising tutors versus tutoring directly, you will still be recording that data.
Right, exactly. Great. Next slide. All right, so again, thinking about outputs, what needs to be monitored. So this is going to be the information that you're going to put into the Google spreadsheet. And this is for K through 12 and adult participants. What are you going to collect for the learners, for the people that are being tutored? You want to know their names. Again, you can use IDs. Some sites prefer that you use ID or code instead of their names. That's fine. You want to record the tutoring session. So how many hours are they being tutored? When did they enroll in the program? When did they finish the program? Sites have different ways of determining completion, and that may vary from what Literacy Core uses, but you still want to know when are they exiting the program, when are they finishing. And then for each learner, you'll also need to collect testing information. For K through 12, you're going to be collecting the Bader test. For adults, you're going to be collecting their adult self-evaluations. For adult programs, you'll also need to collect economic disadvantage. This is something that most sites are already collecting anyway. However, if you find that your site is not collecting this information, you want to make sure that you check in with Narina about that to determine what are the next steps, what are we going to do if this data is not being collected. This is part of the NC Literacy Core goals, so we want to make sure that we're able to capture all of these things. So again, not just with economic disadvantage, but with any of it. If you're having trouble or you're unsure where you're going to get the information, definitely check in with Narina early. That way she can help support you. And towards the end of the presentation, she'll talk to you more about where you can get that type of support or how she can support you in that way and the best ways to communicate with her. Do you want to pull up the Google spreadsheet, Narina, so that we can take a look at what that looks like for the learners?
Yeah. So this spreadsheet that I've pulled up is for Community and Schools of Durham. And so this is a K through 12 site. So to just give you an idea, this tab, once again, every member is shared a Google spreadsheet of their site. So this first tab is going to record your learner data. In this first column, column A, you can put down your participant name or a code number, because many times there are sites that don't want to release the name. So they'll assign code numbers to their learners, and that's totally fine. You'll list what site. So for example, Community and School has members serving at a few different schools. So in this case, you would put down the school that particular learner is at, or where that particular learner's after school program is at. We have date enrolled, and you can jump in on this too, Corliss, but what I've been telling folks is that as far as date enrolled goes, sometimes it'll vary with adult learners, but if a child has been in the program for a few years now, let's say the after school program, you can still just put the beginning of the year when they were enrolled in that program again for that year. And then you've got your date of your pretest and the pretest score in column E. So you're going to record when you administered the beta pretest and the score of the beta pretest. And then in these next two columns, you're going to have date of post-test and then the beta post-test score. And then as far as date of program completion goes, we have our own measures that we use to measure program completion. You won't have to worry about that, but you can just put down the date of whenever they left or exited the program. So if you've done the post-test score and it's almost the last day of school, you can put down that date. Was there anything you wanted to add about program completion, the date of program completion, Corliss?
Nope, all of it sounds good. I think in terms of the beta test, I wanted to reiterate that sometimes, you aren't actually going to be the only one giving those tests. So just be thinking about how you can actually collect that information from the other folks that you're working with. So this isn't as simple necessarily as just you taking your data and putting it in. You may have to collect data from multiple people and then compile it into the Google spreadsheet.
Yes, thank you for saying that, Corliss. You might end up being in a role where you are supervising tutors as opposed to being a direct tutor yourself. And so depending on how you go about it, you will have to train your tutors on how to use the betas, and then you'll be collecting that information from them. So it'll be important to definitely have some kind of system to ensure that these pre-tests are being carried out and that you have access to all that information. Also, just on the side here, after the data program completion, we have this other aspect of the Google spreadsheet, which is contact hours. So if a learner, let's say you're working with a learner directly, and you will, once again, similar to the volunteer hours, you'll be gathering for the month. So let's say you worked with a particular learner for 20 hours that month, that's what you will document. If you aren't the one that's working directly with your learner and you're supervising a tutor that's working directly with your learner, you will count the hours that your tutor has worked directly with that learner during that month. And then over here at the very last column under you, it will give you learner contact hour totals for each learner. So just to give you an idea, it will tally up at that far right column under you. And then I'm also going to pull up, Corliss, real quick, the adult learner data. This looks a little bit different. So this is a spreadsheet for Reading Connections in Greensboro that works with adult populations. Similar, once again, we've got participant name or code number. And your adult learner will probably be enrolled in a particular program, whether it's ABE, ESOL, or GED. So making sure to specify which one it is. For date enrolled, this can vary more than a K through 12 learner. Oftentimes adults have been with the same program for years and they're not necessarily re-enrolling every year, they're just there on an ongoing basis. So I've seen people take various approaches to this. You can put the date that they were initially enrolled, or you could say like existing learner at organization. You could also put when you first came into contact with them and just specify that piece. But either way, it's okay if they've been there for the past few years. You'll only be responsible for when you've come into contact with this learner. That's the program data that you'll be gathering. You'll want to check if they're economically disadvantaged. That can be something that isn't always recorded specifically, but for the most part, just check in with your site supervisor and your organization, because chances are with organizations working with marginalized populations that there's going to be a significant number of folks who are economically disadvantaged. And then this is where your adult self-eval will be completed, and this won't be done until the end of the year, unlike the pre and post baders, which we do at the beginning and end of the year. And once again, this is where you will record your contact hours every month with that particular learner. Was there anything you needed to add, Corliss?
No, that sounds great.
Okay, great. I'll go back to the slideshow.
All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so as Narina alluded to on the Google spreadsheet, there are two ways that we are measuring participants' growth. There's one way for the adults, and then there's one way for K through 12. The adult self-evaluation is paper format. I think that there's also an electronic format. Most people use paper, and it's administered once per year. And then the beta, also as Narina mentioned, is done in the fall and then also in the spring for the pre and the post test. And so again, I think the important thing here is that you yourself know how to use the tool, but also you are responsible for any tutors that also work at your site knowing how to use the tool, because you're not going to be able to give all of these tests by yourself. So a big part of your work is going to be not only knowing how to use it, but then developing a training around it so that you can teach the people that you're working with how to actually use this. For the adult self-evaluation, you've got more time because that's done at the end of the year. For the baders, you need to give them that pre-test as soon as possible in September. So you want to really dig into what does that test look like, and then how are you going to also train other people on how to do it. And so they've got to actually know how to administer the test, but then they also have to know how to record the test for the baders. And then you also have to have a mechanism for getting that data back from them so that you can put it into the Google spreadsheet. So it's definitely worthwhile taking some time to really make sure that you have a sense of what this looks like. The adult self-evaluation and the beta tests are both found on the NCLC member website. Narina, I don't know if you wanted to add additional information about this, especially how they can get help with this if there's help needed.
Yeah, so we are always available if there's ever any confusion about the beta test. Is going to be the one that's more has a little bit more of a learning curve as far as understanding it and learning how to administer it. So we're definitely here, myself and other staff at Scale, to help you understand the beta test if there's any confusion. And I want to urge that if there is any confusion, to reach out as soon as possible, because as Corliss was saying, this is something that you want to do at the beginning of the year. That's the main way that we're going to measure growth, and the longer period of time between the pre and post, the better, because it shows a longer period of time where the learner had an opportunity for growth. So if there's any confusion, please let us know. Same with the adult self-evals. And I will be going over these two documents in person, depending on what site you're at, with you. So I'm always available for one-on-one phone calls if there's any confusion around that as well. And I will pull up the, let's see, I'll pull up the NCLC website real quick just to show. So as you see, once again, this is where all our documents live. If you go down to required evaluation tools, we've got the beta instructions and what you'll need, but I will also be going over this with you so you'll understand it more. And then we have our adult evaluation forms. So I did want to go over that with the adult self-evals. We have different versions. We have two that we're working on updating, but we have an English adult self-eval, but then we also have it available in a few different languages, which directly corresponds to the English one. In Spanish, Mandarin, French, Korean, and Arabic, we have one that uses a smiley face as opposed to words. And then we have one for computer literacy as well, because we have a member this year who's in a computer literacy program. And that was it on my end.
Great. And then you can also just see the beta instructions there too. So definitely check that out. I think we can go back to the PowerPoint.
Oh, I didn't realize we hadn't gone back to it. Sorry. There we go.
Okay, thanks. All right. So at this point, I'm going to wrap up my part. Just to summarize, there's the two major goals. So if you're getting confused and tracking all of this, know that it tracks back to either volunteer management or the direct service with K through 12 and adult learners. And so underneath both of those, there are ways to measure the who, what, when, where, how. That's your outputs, your program monitoring. And then there's also a way to measure the essentially effectiveness of the program. And that's done through looking at the outcomes related to volunteer management practices, and then also did the learners actually improve their literacy over the course of the year. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Narina, who's going to talk about some of the core data collection tools, how they're used, how she'll use them, and she'll also, speak more to what it actually looks like within the program. And then I will come back on at the very end to wrap things up.
Great. Thank you so much, Corliss. So you've heard us talk about a notebook or binder, and to go into a little bit more about what that is, each organization has a binder that we have given them. And so this binder is really meant to be where you keep all your hard data. And it's going to be the place where you not only put in how your volunteer recruitment and management plan, but it's going to be where you put in the documents that you're using to document how you're going about your volunteer management assessment plan. This is where volunteer sign-in sheets will live. This is also, if you're conducting pre and post betas, you will be keeping your hard copies of your betas in your binder as well. And the reason we have you do that, even though you're electronically putting it in, is if someone were to come in and say, what is the source of this data, you would want to be able to point to a specific source of where you got your data from, or else that data would not be considered valid. So that's why we have the Google spreadsheet, which is that next piece, but then we also want your binder to keep all the hard copies of everything that you're doing throughout the year, volunteer, management-wise, and learner data-wise. So if you have adult self-evals, you will be including those in your binder at the end of the year. Oftentimes, there is more than one member at a site, so you all will be sharing the binder. And what I recommend with that is revisiting it every so often, setting up a time with the other members at your site to see if you're keeping up to date with your binder. With certain organizations, if the areas are separate enough, I've made a binder for each of those separate areas. But that is really going to be the way that you showcase what you've done during the year. Your next data collection tool is your Google spreadsheet, which we went over, but I'm going to pull up again real quick. And so you want to be inputting the data that you have from your hard copy in your binder into this, and you want to be doing this regularly. You want to be keeping up with this on a monthly basis, because oftentimes if you wait until later on in the year, it's a lot harder to catch up. It could mean making mistakes with the data or missing out on certain data. There's a lot of room for error, and also just so you're aware of where you're at program evaluation wise, this is why we say that you need to be completing this every month. And then finally, let's see, you've got your monthly member report. Your member monthly report is available on the Google Drive. It's available as a Google form that you can access directly through the NCLC website. The member monthly report is there for both you and I, and it is there as a tool for you to not only say where you are data-wise that month, but it's a way for you and I to check in. I will be having monthly check-ins with all the members, and so this monthly report will also serve as a platform for us to talk about when we check in during our monthly phone calls. And I'm going to pull that up as well. So let's see. Just so you can have an idea of what questions are on there.
We can still see the PowerPoint right now.
That's fine. I'm just looking for it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Corliss. There we go. Okay. So your monthly member report, this you can pull down when you go to your NCLC website. This will be under required evaluation tools. It's in the form of a Google form. Corliss, can we see the monthly member report now?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to fill out a test so you can see how it looks. So you're going to choose a drop down for the month that you have worked and are entering the report for. Your monthly member report is due on the 10th of every month. And so if you are turning in a monthly member report for this September, for example, or for this past August, for example, you will be turning in your monthly member report on September 10th. And so August, you would choose August for them, even though you're submitting it September 10th, you will choose August to show that this is the month that you're entering your report for. Now, the member monthly report is just a list of 4 very simple questions. As we get closer to the end of the year, there'll be some additional questions beginning in April that will ask you more about where you're at data-wise. But for now, it's just 4 very simple questions on whether you've updated your data, your biggest accomplishment this month, the biggest challenge, any questions or concerns you have about your data or your service year. So if there's still confusion about recording your data and going through the assessment piece, this is your place to put where that you're still confused, and we'll check in after you turn in your member monthly report. Okay. And I think that's all I had for core data collection tools. So just to reiterate, you have your notebook to keep all your hard data, which you will visit throughout the year. You have your Google spreadsheet that you will be visiting monthly and updating your data that has been shared to you, and your member monthly report, which you'll be filling out every month, and it's due on the 10th of every month. So this just kind of goes into more detail of what you will be using the notebooks as. And you will include your volunteer recruitment and retention plan in the notebook. If you have a Google Doc version of it, you can just print that out and put it in the notebook, and then also refer to the one that you have online. All right.
I think that we pretty much covered these pieces.
Yeah.
So I think we can skip on to the next slide. Yep.
Okay. Member monthly report. Next steps.
Okay, so the next steps, you want to make sure that you review your notebook. Take a minute to look at it, look at the pieces. Narina's kind of giving you the overview. You want to create a Google Drive plan. Make sure that you know where this data is coming from. As Narina mentioned, in order for the data to be valid, it can't just appear on the Google spreadsheet. We need to make sure that we know where it's coming from. So make sure that you have a plan to capture the actual data, and that you're keeping the hard copies of that information. You want to make sure that you know when you're going to enter this data, like how regular will data be, how regularly or what schedule will the data be entered, and then who's going to be entering data. Do you have more than one member at your site? How will you guys work together? How will you collect the raw data from your tutors so that you can put it into the Google Drive? And then make sure you're putting these things on your calendar, such as that member monthly report. The 10th comes up really quickly. And in order to have that report ready on the 10th, there's other work that needs to happen before that. So just make sure you're calendaring all of these items and that you have a plan for it. Do we have one more slide? Okay, so I think we're going to summarize and put all of this together for you. Next slide. All right, so there is a NCLC member data collection checklist. This is in a handout form. It basically lists all of the different pieces of the program evaluation. I'm not sure if that lives on the website yet, but I will make sure that Narina has it so that it can go on the website. All right, next slide. All right, and so here are just some next steps to get you ready for this year-long evaluation that you're going to be doing. So for volunteer management, make sure that you take that member volunteer management survey. You want to meet with your site director to determine your goals. You've got to create your volunteer recruitment and retention plan. You want to plan for how you're going to document those volunteer trainings. And some people need to plan those trainings. What exactly would those trainings be? How will you collect data on them? You also want to plan to collect and document that volunteer data. So the names, the hours, how are you going to capture that information? And then you want to create a timeline or a calendar of events related to volunteer data collection so that you have a sense of the entire year and what are the kind of key dates that you want to make sure that you're keeping in mind so that you don't get behind on anything. For your participants, that's the second goal. You want to make sure that similar to the what we talked about for the volunteers, you want to have a plan for how you're going to collect all of this data. But you want to make sure that you have a sense of that adult self-evaluation. Take some time to pull it up on the website. You may want to print it out and put it in your notebook just so that you have kind of a visual reminder of what that looks like. Same thing for the Baders. I definitely would recommend also probably printing that out, putting that in your notebook, taking some time to read through it, and contacting Narina so that you can make sure that you understand it and that you know how to do the scoring. It is pretty tricky. And then as you're thinking about the scoring for the Bader test, once you understand it, remember that you've got to teach it to other people, that you need other people to help you with these Baders. So you'll also want to think about, what are the best practices for helping make sure my tutors know how to do this? One of the things that people have found in the past is that you actually have to have people do the Bader test themselves, actually practice doing some scoring so that they can really understand what that process is like. And then for your Google Drive, you want to make sure that you have a plan for that as well. Make sure that you know where each piece of the data is coming from. Where will it be documented? Where will the real data live? And you want to also determine on what schedule it will be entered into your document. Know that you will need to make sure that it's updated monthly. And I think that that's it for me. Narina, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Not to this, but I'm going to go over to the next slide
Okay.
and just talk about a tentative timeline for program evaluation to give you an idea of when you want to be doing these things. All of you have been given a list of important dates, which is all our upcoming important dates for the NCLC program year, along with service events, quarterly trainings, webinars, but then also due dates for when you want to be administering some of these pieces of your program evaluation. And so some of these timelines might vary, but overall, as far as the member volunteer assessment survey, you want this to be completed by the end of September. So you have enough time for the year to be carrying out the pieces of it. Your volunteer recruitment and retention plan, ongoing, but you should be beginning that in August, September. If you are onboarding late, and you've already missed these months or you're at the end of September, you just want to make sure that you do these pieces as soon as possible so you're giving yourself enough time. Post-volunteer management survey, that doesn't need to happen until the end of the service year. Your volunteer satisfaction survey can be administered throughout the year. It will depend on how your volunteer cycle is set up at your site. So you might have volunteers rotate by semester. So when a semester is ending, you could give out your volunteer satisfaction survey. You may have volunteers that are only there for a one-time tutoring event, or it's a very short-term piece. You can still administer that volunteer satisfaction survey. So if you know a volunteer is about to leave and isn't going to be there all year, keep a stack. There's a printable version. Keep a stack of those nearby. Adult evaluations, I haven't put a specific month. I put to be administered at the end of the year, but that will also vary based on your site. I know last year some folks lined it up because their site also had a set schedule of when their learners took certain assessments. And so you could line it up with that. Like if you have a batch of your learners that are being tested in April, for example, that could be a good time, since everyone is in one place, to administer the adult evaluation then. If you know, once again, that your adult learner is leaving, I would still administer it, even if they've only been there for a short amount of time. As far as the Baders go, you definitely want to do these at the beginning of the year, and you want to have those completed by the end of September. And then post-Baders by the end of the year. So depending on your program, looking at from like end of April through June, anywhere between that time, so you can accurately measure that growth. And then finally, the monthly member report, as we said, that's due the 10th of every month through the Google form. I think that was it as far as timeline on my end. Corliss, did you have anything to add?
Nope, I think I'm good.
Okay, great. Well, that's all that we have today as far as the basic rundown of what program evaluation is. Obviously, if you have any questions, you're always welcome to reach out to me. And this is a very in-depth process, so it's okay to have questions. It's okay to still be a little bit confused, but we're here to help you work through it. And this is something that that will be a pretty important part of your service year, and something that, you know, is definitely a skill set that you will gain, and also something when you're looking for future employers, talking about how you were able to participate in gathering and assessing data. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.
All right.